What if your seat in first class wasn't just a ticket but a trigger? Imagine this. A 16-year-old girl, brilliant and black, settles into the luxury seat she earned, only to be targeted by a flight attendant and a police officer who decide she doesn't belong. They see her braids and her youth, not her ticket. They threaten, they command, they try to humiliate her. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They never asked who her father was. In the next few minutes, you'll witness how a single phone call didn't just save her seat. It canceled the entire flight. Stay tuned for a story of prejudice, power, and the hard, undeniable price of karma. The air in the first-class cabin of Transatlantic Airways Flight 727 from New York's JFK to London Heathrow was different. It was a filtered, rarefied atmosphere, smelling faintly of clean leather and expensive, understated perfume. It was an environment designed to be an oasis of calm, a bubble of tranquility separating its occupants from the loud, crowded reality of modern air travel. For 16-year-old Serafina Sierra Jones, it was simply the quietest place she could find to review her sheet music before the long flight. Sierra was not your typical teenager, but she tried her best to look the part. She wore a deep burgundy hoodie from her favorite university's music program, comfortable joggers, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. Her hair was styled in intricate box braids, adorned with a few silver clasps that occasionally caught the soft, ambient light of the cabin. Tucked beside her seat, a sleek silver Rimawa carry-on held her most precious possession, a 19th-century Italian violin, a gift from her grandmother. She was on her way to a prestigious summer residency for young soloists in London, an opportunity she had earned through years of relentless practice and a talent that was undeniable. She had found her pod 1A with the ease of a seasoned traveler. Her father, Marcus Jones, believed that if you worked hard for excellence, you should be allowed to enjoy its fruits. For him, flying first class wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity for arriving rested and ready for business. For Sarah, it was just a comfortable seat with enough legroom to stretch and a plug for her phone. She had just settled in, her headphones on but no music playing yet, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see a flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with tightly pinned blonde hair and a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. Her name tag read Brenda. "Can I help you, honey?" Brenda's voice was saccharine, but with a sharp metallic edge. Sarah slid her headphones down around her neck. "Oh no, thank you. I'm all set." Brenda's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Sarah's attire. The hoodie, the sneakers, the braids. It was a practiced, judgmental inventory that took less than a second. "This is the first-class cabin," she stated, as if Sarah might be confused. "Yes, I know," Sarah replied, her voice polite but firm. She pointed to the seat number above her head, 1A. Brenda's smile tightened. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Sarah had noticed Brenda hadn't asked the balding man in the expensive-looking suit in 1B, or the woman with the diamond tennis bracelet across the aisle. Just her. A quiet sigh, almost inaudible, escaped Sarah's lips. She was used to this, the subtle and sometimes not so subtle questioning of her presence in spaces where people like her were not expected. She reached into the side pocket of her backpack, retrieved the crisp paper of her boarding pass, and handed it to Brenda. The flight attendant took it, her eyes scrutinizing the name Serafina Jones and the seat assignment 1A, as if searching for a forgery. She held it for a beat too long, a small power play. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, her composure unwavering. She had been coached by her father for moments like this. "Never let them see you sweat," he'd always say. "Your calm is their confusion." Brenda handed the pass back, her thin lips pressed into a line. "For now," she said, her voice dropping the sweet pretense. "Just so you know, the first-class amenities are for first-class passengers only. If you have friends in coach, they need to stay back there." The accusation was so blatant, so steeped in prejudice, that it momentarily stunned Sarah. Before she could formulate a response, Brenda had already turned on her heel and glided away, her mission of establishing dominance seemingly accomplished. Sarah watched her go, the quiet hum of the cabin suddenly feeling heavy and oppressive. She put her headphones back on, but the silence she sought was gone, replaced by the loud, ugly static of assumption. She pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over her father's contact. Not yet, she thought. I can handle this. But a knot of dread was already tightening in her stomach. The flight hadn't even taken off, and the oasis had already been poisoned. Brenda retreated to the galley, her face a mask of self-righteous indignation. She began rearranging coffee mugs with sharp, angry movements. Her junior colleague, a young man named Alex, watched her cautiously. "Problem in 1A?" he asked. "You saw her," Brenda snapped, not looking at him. "Dressed like she's going to the mall. These people think they can just buy a cheap upgrade and act like they own the place. I bet the ticket is fake or stolen. She showed you her pass, though, right?" Alex ventured, trying to be the voice of reason. He had seen the brief interaction and noticed the girl's calm demeanor. "It looked real enough," Brenda conceded, slamming a metal drawer shut. "But it's the principle of the thing. She doesn't belong here. She's probably going to be a problem the whole flight. Asking for endless snacks, trying to bring her friends up from economy. You have to nip it in the bud." Brenda's prejudice was a known, if unspoken, issue among the cabin crew. She came from a generation of flight attendants who saw the first-class cabin as a sacrosanct space for a certain type of clientele. The modern world, with its diverse array of successful people, seemed to offend her on a fundamental level. Dissatisfied with the non-resolution, Brenda decided to escalate. She walked back into the cabin and approached Sarah again, this time with a new line of attack. "I've checked our manifest," Brenda said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "And there seems to be a discrepancy with your ticket. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the gate to sort it out." Sarah looked up, her heart sinking. This was a lie, and a poorly constructed one at that. A discrepancy. What kind of discrepancy? "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details here," Brenda said, waving a dismissive hand. "Please, let's not make a scene." The irony of the statement was lost on Brenda, but not on the man in 1B, a corporate lawyer named Richard, who was now watching the exchange with growing unease. He knew an abuse of authority when he saw one. Sarah stood her ground. "No," she said calmly. "My boarding pass is valid. The gate agent scanned it. It's in your system. If there's a problem, you can sort it out from your terminal right there in the galley. I'm not leaving my seat." Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. A teenager, a black teenager in a hoodie, was openly defying her. In her mind, this was an insurrection. "Young lady, you are interfering with the duties of a flight crew. That is a federal offense. Now I am asking you one more time to come with me." "And I am telling you no," Sarah replied, her voice gaining a steely edge she inherited from her father. The standoff was now a public spectacle. A few passengers were murmuring. One person, a few rows back, had discreetly started filming on their phone. Defeated and furious, Brenda stormed off toward the cockpit, her voice a sharp hiss as she spoke to the gate agent stationed at the jet bridge door. "Get me airport police now. I have a passenger who is refusing to comply with crew instructions and is occupying a seat that isn't hers." She had crossed a line, invoking law enforcement based on a complete fabrication. The gate agent, a young woman overwhelmed by the imperious flight attendant, picked up her radio. Within minutes, two figures appeared at the entrance to the first-class cabin, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from tense to menacing. One was a younger officer looking hesitant. The other was a man in his 50s, with a weathered face, a thick mustache, and the weary, cynical eyes of someone who had seen it all and expected the worst. His name tag read Officer Miller. Officer Kalen Miller was 3 years from retirement. He was tired of what he saw as a world coddling a generation of entitled youth. When he got the call for a non-compliant passenger in first class, his mind had already painted a picture, and the sight of Sarah, young, black, dressed down, fit his preconceived narrative perfectly. He didn't see a gifted musician. He saw a problem to be removed. He strode down the aisle, his boots heavy on the plush carpet, stopping right in front of Sierra's seat. He ignored the other passengers, his focus narrowing entirely on her. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low rumble of authority that was designed to intimidate. "I'm Officer Miller. I've been informed that you're refusing to leave the aircraft. We have a problem here." Sierra looked from the officer's hard face to Brenda, who was standing behind him, a smug, triumphant look in her eyes. The knot of dread in her stomach had now become a cold stone of fear, but her father's voice echoed in her mind again. "Stay calm, state facts, get their names." "Officer," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "There is no problem. This is my assigned seat. I have a valid boarding pass. The flight attendant has been harassing me since I boarded." Miller's lip curled in a slight sneer. It was the same story he always heard. Everyone was a victim. "The flight attendant says you won't show her your pass and you're in the wrong seat." "That's not true," Sarah stated flatly. "I showed it to her once and she can verify it on her own system. She is lying." "Are you calling a uniformed flight attendant a liar?" Miller challenged, leaning in closer, using his physical presence to loom over her. From seat 1B, Richard, the lawyer, had heard enough. "Officer, with all due respect," he interjected, his voice calm and authoritative. "The young lady is correct. I saw her show the flight attendant her boarding pass. The attendant has been needlessly antagonistic toward her from the moment she boarded." Miller shot him a withering glare. "Sir, this does not concern you. Please stay out of official police business." He turned back to Sarah, his patience already thin, now gone. "That's it. I'm done talking. You have two choices. You can walk off this plane on your own 2 feet, or I can take you off in handcuffs. Your call." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Handcuffs, arrest. For what? For sitting in a seat she was supposed to be in. The humiliation, the injustice, it was all crashing down on her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she fought them back fiercely. She would not give them the satisfaction. She looked at Officer Miller's implacable face, at Brenda's cruel smirk. She knew she couldn't win this fight with them. They held all the power in this metal tube. But they didn't know about the power she had on speed dial. With a slow, deliberate movement, she reached for her phone. "What are you doing?" Miller barked. "No phone calls." Sarah ignored him. Her thumb pressed the familiar contact. "I'm not making a phone call," she said, her voice trembling slightly but clear as a bell. "I'm calling my father." Officer Miller almost laughed. "Your father? What's your father going to do? You think he's going to talk you out of this? It's too late for that kid." Sarah didn't answer. She held the phone to her ear as it rang once, twice. On the third ring, a calm, deep voice answered, a voice accustomed to commanding attention in boardrooms around the globe. "Sarah, you should be in the air by now. Everything okay?" "Hi, Daddy." Sarah's voice wavered, the composure she had fought so hard to maintain finally cracking. "Not exactly." "Talk to me. What's wrong?" The calm in his voice was instantly replaced by a razor-sharp edge of concern. "There's a flight attendant and a police officer," she began, her words tumbling out. "They're trying to make me leave the plane. They said my ticket isn't valid. They're saying I have to get off or they'll arrest me." A dead silence met her from the other end of the line. It was a terrifyingly quiet moment. When Marcus Jones spoke again, his voice was transformed. It was stripped of all warmth, all paternal softness. It was the voice of the CEO of Orion Global Logistics, a multi-billion-dollar company that controlled shipping lanes and air freight on every continent. It was a voice that did not make requests. It issued decrees. "Serafina, put the police officer on the phone." Sarah held the phone out to Miller. "My father wants to speak with you." Miller rolled his eyes in theatrical annoyance, grabbing the phone from her hand. "Sir, this is Officer Miller with the Port Authority Police," he said into the phone, his tone dripping with condescension. "I don't know what your daughter has told you, but she is being disruptive and refusing to vacate a seat that is not hers. You need to tell her to comply with my instructions immediately." He listened for a moment, his smug expression slowly beginning to dissolve, his eyebrows furrowed. The muscles in his jaw tightened. The passengers nearby could not hear the voice on the other end, but they could see its effect on the officer. The color began to drain from his face. On the other end of the line, Marcus Jones was speaking in a low, chillingly precise tone. "Officer Miller, I am recording this call. First, you will address me as Mr. Jones. Second, you will remove your hands from my daughter's personal property. Third, you will tell me your badge number." Miller, flustered, stammered, "Sir, you don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." Marcus cut him off, his voice like chipping ice. "I understand that my 16-year-old daughter, who is a ticketed, confirmed passenger in Seat 1A of Transatlantic Airway Flight 727, is being threatened with arrest based on the lies of a flight attendant. So, for the last time, give me your badge number." Shaken, Miller recited his badge number. 4,822. "Thank you, Officer Miller. Badge number 4,822. Marcus's voice was venomously polite. "Now, what is the full name of the flight attendant who made the complaint?" Miller looked over at Brenda, who was now looking decidedly nervous. "Her name is Brenda. I don't know her last name." "Find out," Marcus commanded. "You are the acting authority figure. Obtain her full name and employee number. You have 30 seconds. The officer, now sweating under the harsh cabin lights, turned to Brenda. "What's your last name? Your employee ID?" he hissed. Brenda, pale and trembling, stammered her details, which Miller dutifully relayed into the phone. "Excellent," Marcus said. "Now, Officer Miller, I want you to listen to me very, very carefully. You are currently a party to a situation involving unlawful detention and racial profiling of a minor. That is a serious civil rights violation. My company, Orion Global Logistics, happens to be the single largest corporate client for Transatlantic Airways Freight Division. We spend over $90 million a year with this airline. In my hand, I have the personal cell phone number of Jonathan Crestwood, the CEO of this airline's parent company. In approximately 5 minutes, I will be calling him to sever that contract, permanently." A collective gasp could almost be heard from the passengers who were close enough to understand the gravity of the situation. Miller's face was now ashen. "But that's not all," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to an even more dangerous level. "My legal team is already drafting a lawsuit against the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which will name you, Officer Miller, personally, for everything from harassment to attempted false arrest. Your pension will be the first thing we attach. Your career will be over, and Brenda, her life as she knows it will be dismantled piece by piece. Do you understand me?" Miller was speechless. He was a beat cop, used to dealing with petty theft and disorderly conduct. He had just stumbled into a war with a titan of industry. "Now," Marcus's voice shifted again, becoming a command prompt. "I want you to hand this phone to the most senior-ranking crew member on this aircraft. Not Brenda. The captain. Go get the captain of the plane and put him on this phone. Do it now." Without a word, Officer Miller, his face a mess of confusion and stark terror, turned and practically ran toward the cockpit. He handed the phone to the pilot, a silver-haired man named Captain Evans, who had been alerted to the commotion. Captain Evans took the phone, a look of deep concern on his face. "This is Captain Evans." He listened for a full minute, his expression growing more and more grim. He nodded several times. "Yes, Mr. Jones, I understand completely. No, I was not aware of the situation's full nature. Yes, sir, I apologize profusely. Please allow me to handle this personally. Yes, sir, I understand your position." He handed the phone back to a bewildered-looking Miller. The line was dead. Captain Evans took a deep breath, his professional composure masking a torrent of fury at his crew. He turned to Miller. "Officer, your presence is no longer required. In fact, it is detrimental to the safety and operation of this flight. Please leave my aircraft." He then turned to Brenda, his eyes blazing with a cold fire she had never seen. "Brenda, you are relieved of your duties for this flight. Go to the back galley and do not speak to another passenger. We will have a conversation when we are on the ground, a very, very long one." Brenda looked as if she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth to protest, but the captain's glare silenced her. She turned and shuffled away, her smugness shattered, replaced by the dawning horror of her miscalculation. Captain Evans then turned to the entire first-class cabin. He cleared his throat, his voice resonating with authority. He looked directly at Syrah, his expression one of profound apology. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strained. "May I have your attention, please? Due to an unresolved security and operational issue on board, I am afraid that Transatlantic Airway Flight 727 to London Heathrow is now cancelled." A wave of shock and disbelief washed over the cabin. Cancelled? An entire transatlantic flight? Phones immediately came out as people started to process the news. Angry, confused chatter erupted. The oasis of calm had officially become a storm. Amidst the chaos, Sarah sat quietly in her seat. The immediate threat was gone, but the victory felt hollow. The entire plane, hundreds of people, were now being punished because two people couldn't see past the color of her skin. She looked out the window, at the ground crew starting to move away from the plane. The call had done more than just save her seat. It had brought a 300-ton metal bird to its knees. The captain's announcement detonated in the cabin like a stun grenade. The initial shock quickly morphed into outrage. Businessmen in expensive suits began shouting about missed meetings, families about ruined vacations, and everyone about the sheer absurdity of canceling a fully boarded international flight. "Cancelled? What do you mean cancelled?" a man yelled from row 3. "Just kick the troublemaker off." He was pointing ambiguously in Sarah's direction. Captain Evans's face was grim. He held up a hand for silence. "The decision is final. This aircraft will not be flying tonight. The reasons are complex. Airline representatives will be at the gate to assist every one of you with rebooking and accommodations. I sincerely apologize for the disruption to your travel plans." His gaze lingered for a moment on Sarah, an unspoken apology in his eyes that went far beyond a delayed flight. Officer Miller stood frozen in the aisle, the captain's words echoing in his ears. Cancelled. He had dealt with angry drunks, petty thieves, and frantic passengers his entire career, but he had never witnessed anything like this. The power wielded by that voice on the phone was of a magnitude he couldn't comprehend. It was like swatting a fly and having the entire building collapse around you. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones. This was no longer an incident report. This was a career-ending cataclysm. He turned and walked off the plane, his confident stride gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of a defeated man. Brenda, hidden in the rear galley, was having a full-blown panic attack. She could hear the angry murmurings of the deplaning passengers. Through the small porthole, she saw the ground crew retracting the jet bridge. Every mechanical groan sounded like a nail being hammered into the coffin of her 30-year career. She had wanted to put a teenager in her place. Instead, she had grounded a flagship route and incurred the wrath of a man who could command titans. The deplaning process was slow and chaotic. As passengers from economy began to file through the first-class cabin, many shot angry or confused looks at Sarah, who remained seated, waiting for instructions. The man who had filmed the incident on his phone made a point of walking past her, giving her a small, supportive nod. The lawyer in 1B, Richard, leaned over before he left. "Young lady," he said quietly, handing her his business card. "My name is Richard Sterling. What that flight attendant and officer did was disgraceful. If you or your father need a witness or any legal assistance whatsoever, do not hesitate to call me. You handled yourself with more grace than any of them deserved." Sarah took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." Finally, when the cabin was nearly empty, a woman in a sharp dark blue Transatlantic Airway corporate suit hurried onto the plane. She was the JFK station manager, and her face was a portrait of controlled panic. She made a beeline for Sarah. "Miss Jones?" she asked, her voice soft and deeply respectful. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am the head of operations here at JFK. On behalf of the entire airline, I want to offer you our deepest, most sincere apologies for the horrific experience you just endured. Miss Vance didn't offer excuses. She didn't try to downplay it. She owned it. Your father has arranged for a private car to take you to a hotel for the night. We have also, at his direction, chartered a private jet for you. It will be ready to take you to London in 3 hours from a private terminal. Your luggage, including your violin, is being personally retrieved and will be waiting for you. Sarah was stunned into silence. A private jet. It was a level of response that was almost as shocking as the initial confrontation. We are also ensuring that every single passenger from this flight is provided with hotel vouchers, meal stipends, and has been automatically rebooked on the next available flights at no charge, Miss Vance continued, wanting to make it clear they were trying to mitigate the fallout. But our primary concern right now is you. What you experienced is unacceptable and goes against everything we stand for. It will be dealt with, I promise you that. Sarah simply nodded, overwhelmed. Miss Vance then escorted her personally off the aircraft, shielding her from the few remaining angry glares. They walked down the now empty jet bridge and into a terminal that was buzzing with the news. Word had already spread like wildfire. They canceled a whole flight for some reason in first class, people whispered. As Sarah was led toward a private exit, she saw Officer Miller standing with his partner near a security checkpoint, being debriefed by a Port Authority superior. Miller looked up and their eyes met for a fleeting second. There was no anger or smugness in his face now. There was only a hollow, dawning recognition of the chasm he had fallen into. In that moment, Sarah didn't feel triumph or revenge. She just felt tired. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and a profound sadness. She had won, if you could call it that, but the battle itself had left an invisible scar, a reminder that some people would always see her as someone who didn't belong, no matter how high she flew. The private jet was waiting, a symbol of her father's power to fix things. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that some things, once broken, could never be truly put back together. The fallout began before Flight 727 was even officially entered into the records as cancelled. As Sarah was being chauffeured to the Windsor suite at the St. Regis, her father, Marcus Jones, was setting a different kind of fire. This fire wasn't fueled by anger, but by the cold, hard currency of consequence. His first call after ensuring Sarah was safe was not to the airline's customer service, but to Jonathan Crestwood, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways' parent corporation, whom he had woken from a sound sleep in his London townhouse. "John, Marcus Jones, sorry to call you at this hour." There was no warmth in his greeting. "Marcus, what's wrong?" Crestwood knew Jones's nocturnal calls were reserved for emergencies or massive business deals. "My daughter, John, my 16-year-old daughter was just threatened with arrest on your Flight 727 out of JFK by your crew and an airport cop for the crime of being a black teenager sitting in seat 1A. So I had the flight canceled." The silence on the other end was absolute. Crestwood knew Marcus Jones was not a man given to hyperbole. "Tell me everything," Crestwood finally said, his voice strained. Marcus laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon. The flight attendant's name, the officer's name and badge number, the refusal to check the manifest, the lies, the threat of handcuffs. By the time he was finished, the $90 million corporate contract wasn't a threat. It was a ghost. "The Orion Global Logistics contract with Transatlantic is terminated. Effective immediately," Marcus stated. "A press release from our end will go out in the morning citing a fundamental breach of trust and a failure of your corporation to ensure the basic safety and dignity of passengers. It will not mention my daughter, but it will mention a pattern of disturbing complaints and a lack of corporate oversight." "Marcus, please," Crestwood pleaded, the financial implications crashing down on him. It wasn't just the $90 million. It was the catastrophic PR nightmare. If Orion, a logistics giant, pulled out, other corporations would get spooked. It could trigger a cascade. "Let me make this right. We will fire everyone involved. We will issue a public apology. We'll donate to a charity of your choice. You will do all of those things, John, Marcus interrupted, his voice like flint. But not to get my business back. You will do them because it's the only conceivable way to begin cleaning up the mess your people made. My daughter was humiliated and terrified. There is no making that right. There is only consequence. The first consequence is our contract. The others will follow. The call ended. Crestwood immediately mobilized his entire executive team. The internal investigation was launched within the hour. Meanwhile, a second front in Marcus's war was opening up against the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, Pan N.J. The lawyers at the firm that kept Orion on retainer were roused from their beds. By 4 a.m., a formal complaint and a notice of intent to sue had been drafted and was waiting to be filed the moment the courts opened. It named Pan N.J. for negligent hiring, improper training, and failure to supervise. And it named Officer Kalen Miller personally for civil rights violations under Section 1983 of the U.S. Code, which allows for lawsuits against government officials for depriving someone of their constitutional rights. The lawyer Richard Sterling's offer to be a witness was gratefully accepted. More powerfully, the passenger who had filmed the incident had already uploaded the video to social media. It was spreading, hashtagged #FlyingWhileBlack and #transatlanticshame. The clip clearly showed Miller's aggression, Sarah's composure, and Brenda's smirking presence. It was a digital smoking gun. For Officer Miller, the reckoning came swiftly. He was called into his supervisor's office before his shift had even officially ended. The Pan N.J. chief was already fielding frantic calls from the mayor's office. Miller's body cam footage was pulled. It corroborated Sarah's story perfectly and directly contradicted the brief, misleading report he had filed before the flight was canceled. The footage captured his dismissive tone, his refusal to listen, and his immediate escalation to the threat of arrest. It was damning. He was placed on immediate, unpaid administrative leave. His badge and service weapon were confiscated. The internal affairs investigation was a mere formality. The lawsuit from Marcus Jones was a death sentence for his career. The pension he was just 3 years away from was now in serious jeopardy. His partner, who had stood by and done nothing, was also placed on leave, cited for failing to intervene. For Brenda, the process was even faster. Transatlantic Airway had a brand to protect. With a viral video circulating and their largest freight client gone, there was no room for deliberation. By sunrise, Brenda was called by a grim-faced HR executive and her union representative. She was read a litany of her violations, discriminating against a passenger, making false statements to law enforcement, and causing an action that led to extreme financial and reputational damage to the company. Her union rep tried to argue, but the evidence was insurmountable. The video, the captain's report, the testimony from other passengers like Richard Sterling, and the sheer scale of the disaster she had caused left no room for defense. She was terminated, effective immediately. The airline also made it clear they would contest any unemployment claim and would provide a factual and complete reference to any future employer in the airline industry, which was a death knell. She was blacklisted. The airline itself began its public self-flagellation. A press release was issued by mid-morning, announcing a top-to-bottom review of its diversity and inclusion training. They announced a multi-million-dollar donation to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. They publicly apologized for the complete and utter failure to protect a young passenger from discrimination. It didn't mention Sarah by name, respecting her privacy, but everyone knew what it was about. The hard karma had hit. It wasn't a vague spiritual payback. It was a precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective deployment of power and resources. It was a corporate and legal blitzkrieg that left careers shattered and institutions reeling. Marcus Jones had not just protected his daughter, he had salted the earth where the offense had grown, ensuring nothing like it could easily grow there again. Part 6. The echoes on the ground weeks turned into a month. The news cycle moved on as it always does, but for those at the epicenter of the Flight 727 incident, the echoes of that canceled flight resonated deeply. altering the course of their lives forever. For Sarah, London was a balm. The summer music residency was everything she had hoped it would be. Immersed in the world of Bach and Beethoven, surrounded by peers who judged her only by the quality of her vibrato and the passion in her playing, she began to heal. The private jet that had flown her across the Atlantic was a strange, isolating experience, a gilded cage meant to protect her. She had arrived in London not rested, but wired and emotionally exhausted. Her father had called her every day for the first week. He never talked about the lawsuits or the firings unless she asked. He just asked about her music, about the friends she was making, about the city. He was trying to give her back her stolen sense of normalcy. One evening, while video calling him, she finally asked, "What happened to them, the flight attendant and the officer?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "They are facing the consequences of their actions, sweetheart. That's all you need to worry about." "Did you ruin their lives?" she asked, the question soft and heavy with a complex mix of feelings. "No, Sarah," he answered, his voice firm but gentle. "They ruined their own lives. They made choices based on prejudice and arrogance. I simply made sure the bill for those choices was delivered to the right address." Sarah accepted that. She focused on her violin, pouring the lingering hurt and confusion into her music. Her final performance at the residency was a rendition of a notoriously difficult Paganini caprice. She played with a fire and a depth that astonished her instructors. It was the sound of a young woman who had faced down ugliness and had emerged not broken, but stronger, her art forged in a crucible she never asked for. She received a standing ovation, and for the first time since that day at JFK, she felt purely, unreservedly proud. For Brenda, life became a series of closed doors. Fired and blacklisted, she couldn't get another job in the travel industry. Her face, briefly infamous from the viral video, made her recognizable in the worst way. She had to sell her condo in Queens to pay her bills. The pride she had taken in her uniform and her perceived status was gone, replaced by the humiliating reality of a job stocking shelves at a 24-hour convenience store on the graveyard shift. She was bitter. In her mind, she was the victim. She complained to her few remaining friends that the world had gone too sensitive, that she was being punished for just doing her job. She never once acknowledged the prejudice that fueled her actions. She saw Sarah not as a person she had wronged, but as the catalyst for her downfall. The karma that hit Brenda wasn't just financial. It was the prison of her own unchanged heart, a life sentence of resentment. For Officer Kalen Miller, the fall was even harder and more public. The Panninge, under immense pressure, made an example of him. The lawsuit moved forward, and the city's lawyers, seeing an indefensible case, pushed him to settle. He was forced into early retirement, his pension slashed by more than half. Stripped of his badge, his authority, and the identity that had defined him for 30 years, he was a man adrift. His wife, a high school teacher, was horrified by the body cam footage, which was eventually leaked to the press. She saw a side of her husband she had never wanted to admit existed. A bully who preyed on a child. Their marriage, already strained by his cynicism, crumbled. He moved into a small, bleak apartment in New Jersey, his days now empty. One afternoon, he saw a news report about the charitable donation Transatlantic had made in the wake of the scandal. The segment featured a brief interview with a civil rights lawyer who spoke about the ongoing fight against systemic bias. Behind the lawyer, on the screen, was a picture of Serafina Jones, smiling, holding her violin. For the first time, Miller didn't see a problem or a troublemaker. He saw a kid, a talented kid by the looks of it, a kid whose life he had tried to upend over nothing. The weight of his actions, of the casual cruelty he had deployed without a second thought, finally landed on him. It wasn't the lost job or the slashed pension that broke him. It was the stark, undeniable truth. He had been on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of decency. The hard karma for Kalen Miller was not just the loss of his career. It was the late, agonizing arrival of self-awareness. He was left with nothing but the long, empty years ahead to contemplate the man he had been. The world kept spinning. Transatlantic Airway implemented a mandatory company-wide dignity and service program designed by a top-tier consulting firm. The Orion Global Logistics contract went to a rival airline, and hundreds of passengers from Flight 727 had a wild story to tell about the time a CEO's phone call canceled their flight. But at the heart of it all was a quiet, powerful truth, that in a world of prejudice and power, sometimes the only thing that can balance the scales is a different kind of power, wielded not for revenge, but for a justice that is as swift and as hard as karma itself. 1 year later, the seasons had turned. A crisp autumn breeze swept through New York City, carrying with it the scent of change. For the people whose lives were irrevocably tangled by the cancellation of Flight 727, the past year had been one of profound and divergent transformation. Serafina Jones was no longer just a gifted violinist. At 17, she now carried herself with a poise that went beyond the discipline of her music. The incident on the plane had awakened something in her, a quiet but unshakable resolve. The world had tried to define her by her race and age, to put her in a box she didn't belong in. She had decided, with the full backing of her father, to build something new from the wreckage of that experience. The settlement from Transatlantic Airway and the Panin J had been substantial. But instead of letting it disappear into a trust fund, Marcus and Sierra had used it as seed money to launch the 1A initiative. The name was Sierra's idea, a reclamation of the space where she was targeted. The foundation had a dual mission: to provide pro bono legal resources for individuals facing travel-related discrimination, and to fund arts and music scholarships for promising students from marginalized communities. Tonight was the initiative's inaugural fundraising gala. Sarah stood near the stage in a glittering ballroom overlooking Central Park, not as a performer, but as the co-founder and keynote speaker. She wore an elegant, deep blue gown, but the real change was in her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by a focused, confident light. Beside her stood Richard Sterling, the lawyer from Seat 1B. True to his word, he had become a fierce ally and now sat on the initiative's board of directors. "Nervous?" he asked with a warm smile. "A little," Sarah admitted. "It's different from playing the violin. With music, the instrument speaks for me. Out there, it's just my own voice." "Your voice is the most powerful instrument you have, Sarah," Richard said. "You've already proven that." Her father, Marcus, approached them, his face beaming with a pride that was deeper than any business deal he had ever closed. "They're waiting for you, sweetheart," he said, adjusting the lapel of his tuxedo. He had channeled his initial cold fury into constructive action, but the change in him was noticeable. He smiled more. He spent more time with Sarah, understanding that his power was most valuable not when used as a weapon, but as a shield and a tool for building a better world for his daughter. Sarah walked to the podium. The room, filled with philanthropists, artists, and community leaders, fell silent. "1 year ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I was sitting in Seat 1A on a flight to London. I was just a girl, excited about a summer of music. But to 2 people that day, I wasn't a musician. I wasn't even a person. I was a problem to be removed. They tried to take my seat, my dignity, and my voice. They failed." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "They failed because my father had the power to make a phone call. They failed because a kind man in Seat 1B chose to speak up. They failed because a passenger I'll never know had the courage to press record. But most people in that situation don't have a powerful CEO on speed dial. Most people don't have witnesses who will intervene. Most people suffer in silence. The 1A initiative exists for them. It exists to turn the privilege that saved me into a right that protects everyone." Her speech was not one of anger, but of empowerment. She spoke of turning pain into purpose, of ensuring that no young person would ever be made to feel like they didn't belong in a space they had earned. When she finished, the room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Marcus Jones watched from the wings, tears glistening in his eyes. He had torn down a system to protect her. She was now building a new one to protect others. Institutional change had been slow but real. At Transatlantic Airway, the Dignity in Service program was now a mandatory part of employee onboarding and annual recertification. CEO Jonathan Crestwood, humbled by the near collapse of his company's reputation and the loss of the Orion contract, took an active role. He often sat in on the training sessions, where the Flight 727 incident was presented as Case Study Alpha, a stark, anonymized lesson in unconscious bias and conflict de-escalation. The culture was shifting from one of suspicion to one of service. The airline would never win back the Orion contract, a permanent scar on their financials, but they were slowly winning back trust, one flight at a time. And what of Kalen Miller? His life was unrecognizable. The lawsuit had been settled, leaving him financially strained. His marriage was over. He lived in a quiet town, his days marked by a monotonous routine. But in that emptiness, the self-awareness that had dawned in his final moments on the job had painfully grown. He started attending therapy, forced to confront the prejudices he had carried for decades. He learned that his cynicism wasn't wisdom. It was a poison that had corroded his soul. The process was agonizing. One of his therapeutic assignments was to write a letter of amends to the person he had wronged. He spent weeks on a letter to Serafina Jones, mailing it to her via Richard Sterling's law firm. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew he hadn't earned it. He simply wanted to take responsibility. "Dear Miss Jones," it read, "I was the officer on Flight 727. There is no excuse for my behavior that day. I was not seeing a person. I was seeing a stereotype that I carried inside me. Your composure and strength in that moment were a testament to your character, while my aggression and arrogance were a testament to my lack of it. I failed you, and I failed the oath I took to protect and serve. I am profoundly sorry for the fear and humiliation I caused you. I know this letter changes nothing for you, but I needed to state the truth of my failure. I hope you continue to find success and happiness. You deserve it. Sincerely, Kalen Miller." Richard passed the letter on to Sarah. She read it once, her expression unreadable. Then she folded it and put it away. She never responded. Her response was the work she was doing with her foundation. Her response was the life she was living. Miller's apology was for his journey, not hers. His karma wasn't a life of misery, but a life of necessary, painful reflection, the only path toward becoming a better man, long after it was too late to be a good officer. The story of Flight 727 became more than just a viral moment or a tale of epic corporate karma. It evolved into a powerful narrative about cause and effect, where a single act of prejudice triggered a chain reaction that exposed not just the worst in people, but also, unexpectedly, the best. It proved that consequences are not always distributed equally, but when power is challenged by a greater, more decisive power, the scales of justice can be forced to balance. Brenda's fate became a cautionary tale whispered in airline break rooms, a stark reminder that a uniform is a symbol of responsibility, not a license for contempt. Kalen Miller's solitary life became a quiet testament to the fact that the hardest reckonings are often the ones we have with ourselves in the silence, long after the world has stopped watching. For Marcus Jones, the incident was a crucible that reforged his understanding of power. He learned that its greatest expression wasn't in canceling a contract or ending a career, but in empowering his daughter to build a legacy of her own. He had moved from a protector to a facilitator, watching with awe as Sarah transformed her trauma into a platform for change. And for Serafina, the final note of her story was not one of victimhood, but of victory. It was the victory of standing on a stage, her voice ringing with purpose. It was the victory of seeing the first group of 1A scholars receive their instruments. It was the quiet victory of reading an apology from a man who once threatened her, not with triumph, but with a solemn understanding that her strength had forced him to confront his weakness. The world is full of conflicts born from snap judgments and deep-seated biases. Most end in quiet humiliation or unspoken anger. But this story, of the cop, the teenager, and the flight-canceling call, serves as a powerful reminder. Every action has an echo. And while some echoes fade, others become a symphony of change, a testament to the fact that sometimes, to create a more just world, you have to be willing to bring the entire system to a screeching halt.